Welcome back to The Great Game. This is episode 39. And in this episode, Jack and I were lucky enough to sit down and chat to Ben from BKGameDesign, all about Touched by Darkness. Touched by Darkness you may have heard about recently in one of the GenCon episodes that we put out. Ben has taken Den of Wolves, a game that many of our listeners will know about, and if you don't, there is an episode with its designer, John Meisen, earlier on, which will be linked below. And Ben's taken Den of Wolves and been able to redevelop it into something new but familiar, Touched by Darkness. We got to chat about the process of adapting another person's megagame and making it something brand new but still holding that original DNA. Also about Ben's success of using the Game Crafter to publish Touched by Darkness. It's a fully packaged, ready-to-go game, highly recommended for people getting into the hobby for the first time, especially as the showrunner and the facilitators running the game. And yeah, it was a good conversation all around. If you have any thoughts about Touched by Darkness, and if you have played it, we'd love to hear from you and what you think about it. There's always a link in the notes below on how you can get in touch with us. And we'd be very keen, as we race towards our 40th episode, to hear from you and what you'd like to hear on the podcast in the future. Thanks, and enjoy this conversation with Ben.
All right, and we're here with Ben from BKGameDesign. Thank you so much for joining us, Ben.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So you've done quite a few different things over your design career, including, I know you're the designer of Vampire the Masquerade Blood Feud, the mega board game. How did you get into mega games, and what's your journey been like?
I think it's the same as most everybody here. It's that infamous shut up and sit down video. But after that video hit, there was a group here in Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm based, called the Cleveland Megagame Council, and they formed and ran a pair of in-person games. They were a ton of fun. I was definitely hooked, having gone to both of them, and then they disbanded. So in the States here, there aren't as many games running. Just never have been. It was quite the mega game drought. So yeah, I tried to do what I could to remedy that with mixed results, as you have mentioned earlier. But actually, as of late, after the COVID pandemic, it was actually boom times. The games moved online, and I got to play so many games and meet so many people in the community, and really get to meet people around the world. And it was COVID was not the best of times, but for Mega Game, it was sort of the best of times. We're moving past that era at this point. Things are starting to go back to in person, but I do want to shout out the Mega Game Coalition and Omega. They've continued to run some things online and continue to sort of like keep that community alive. It's just great to be a part of all of that.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I think we definitely had similar experiences where once everything started going online, it did give us such an opportunity to try all these different games in America and Europe, sometimes with great difficulty due to time zones. But yeah, I think that was one at least silver lining.
Yeah, I think as well, I was going to say, I feel like that period of time, because there was stuff happening, but there weren't a lot of games accessible to everyone due to the circumstances. For us over here, it produced this big audience who were just sitting and waiting. So they'd heard about mega games right on the cusp of COVID, and they were just stewing away, waiting for mega games. So we found when we fully started again, in Sydney, it was last year. It was just a huge turnout, huge demand, and lots of new people, which was really cool. Did you find that in your community, Ben? Was there sort of a build up over that time?
So the mega games that we've been running in person have been primarily through the Mega Game Coalition, and their big event is GenCon, which happens in Indianapolis. And year after year after year after we started running events post-COVID, we have run more events and had more players. So I think we ran, oh goodness, between 15 and 20 games at GenCon this year. It was an insane number, but they were sold out, and we continue to grow and need more game runners and game designers here. So, and what we're really hoping is that it's going to start breaking out, and you're going to have local groups in cities running again, so you can play these games outside of the convention circuit.
Yeah. We've just probably not at the time of recording now, but by the time this comes out, we will have had an episode out with Riley and Trenton at the Coalition. So we talked about the Coalition a lot and how it formed and how it operates, but specifically Gen Con and just how that kind of fascinates us. Not being from the Americas, we do not, con games are just really not a big piece of the culture here. And it seems it's so foreign that it's basically the bread and butter in your scene. I think it was 17 or maybe 19 games at Gen Con this year, which was just madness.
Yeah, in 3.5 days. Yeah.
Yeah, which is just, it's fascinating to me. And intimidating, but fascinating. Before we jump in, so we want to talk to you about Touched by Darkness and figure out how that came about and what the game's all about and how it's been run so far. Before we jump in, though, you've got a little bit of a design background outside MegaGames, right? What else have you been working on in the past, and how did that help you get into this space?
I work as an architect by day, but I have also been doing freelance game design by night for well over a decade at this point. So I have some published games: Bitten, Red Scare, Three Laws of Robotics, Vampire the Masquerade, Blood Feud, as mentioned before. I've worked in the RPG space. I did a self-published RPG called PAX, and some development for a friend's game, Ruination Pilgrimage. And I have done another mega game design that was designed for the digital space, Councils of Valporia. So I'm sort of plugged into the American tabletop game market space and approach it from that type of perspective. So that's sort of my background and what informs a lot of the decisions that I make.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned before we started recording that you were an architect by trade. I'm curious whether or not you have explored that space in the gaming space. Have you done anything that's architect themed or related?
Thematically, no.
Okay.
But I do tend to think about game design and architecture in the same vein, in that they're what I consider second order design problems. In games, you are designing sets of rules, but the rules are not the game. It's the player's interactions and experiences through that. And in architecture, I design sets of plans, but the plan is not the actual building. The plans are a set of instructions for the trades in order to have the building constructed. So whenever I'm thinking about an end result, it's separated from me by a set of other people who are outside of my direct influence. So I have to figure out the most judicious way to have them have the experience or do what I want them to do through the words and lines and diagrams that I put on pieces of paper.
Interesting.
That's so interesting and so true.
Yeah. It's funny. We were talking briefly before, and I was explaining how my background's in government here, and it overlaps a little bit with your, urban design and that kind of thing. I have found it really interesting over the years that I've been doing this, where I can see the through lines of where being involved in government work, and particularly planning, has influenced my views of mega games, how to run events, but also thematically what's interesting in games. And when you're looking at game design, that touches on things like geopolitics or sociology or that kind of thing. I can see how my work has influenced some of my game design. And then in turn, I have been able to see how some of the things I do in the mega game space, particularly the skills that I've developed, they translate back into the workspace as well. I'm not sure if you've encountered that, but yeah, it's a funny thing how they start to merge a little bit, at least in your head when you're doing these things, almost full time on both sides of the coin.
It's a lot of work on both sides of the coin. That is true. I always am surprised, when I finish a design and I'm running it for people in what I consider a finished state, and think to myself, "Oh, the number of hours I put into this."
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. I haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just don't want to count it. Awesome. Well, let's get into that design then. For Touched by Darkness, what is the pitch for the game, and yeah, what's it like?
So, I guess I would say the pitch for the players is, the Dark One has returned. Their eternal eclipse has risen once again and shrouded the world in darkness. And the Empire, the one beacon of light that used to hold sway and protect us, it has fallen as their magical beacons were not relit in time in order to push back the darkness and the shadows that have consumed the world. Except in your little outpost of Cleveland, somehow someone managed to light the beacons, and it is up to you, as perhaps the last bastion of surviving humanity, to work together or not, because you are factional, to push back the darkness by completing the long lost ritual and restoring magical power to the beacons. That's the pitch for the players, and that's the player facing pitch. The real pitch, though, is for the game runners. Touched by Darkness is a complete print on demand mega game. If you go to the Game Crafter, you can see it's there. I'm not selling a license. I'm selling one copy of the game there. You add it to your cart, you give it the 2 months it takes for them to print it and ship it to you, and you have the game and all of the documentation needed to run the game. Uh, it You need a couple extra bits and bops like writing utensils and lanyards, but like it's there for you to take and run right out of the box. Not only that, it is built from the, designed with the first time game runner in mind. I want first time game runners to feel confident and comfortable to pick up this game and this system, and be able to read this control handbook and have it answer a lot of questions that come up over the time of planning a game that aren't necessarily in how to actually run the game itself. So if you are looking to start a game in your area, I want this to be the lowest possible barrier of entry to getting a game in front of a bunch of players that you don't have to print out and sleeve and have a bunch of extra questions that might make you feel less than confident stepping up to the plate and knocking it out of the park for your group of players.
Yeah, awesome. In the past, we've talked a lot about mega games off the shelf, and what's the best thing for beginners and to start their mega game running career. So I'm interested to talk about that in a more detail about how you came to that pitch, I suppose, and was that by design? However, before we kick on, you've given two different pitches there. Is there a third pitch for people who play mega games already and have played Den of Wolves?
If you've played Den of Wolves, the DNA and the backbone of this game are very Den of Wolves. You will recognize 90% of what you're doing. But thematically, it is a completely different setting. As you heard, it's a dark fantasy setting, and you'll notice a number of development work that was done to the game that will make things play slightly differently and hopefully more cleanly for returning players. So if you've played Den of Wolves, you you can definitely play Touched by Darkness and have a similar but different experience.
Yeah, right.
So I think I going back to the game crafter stuff, I think that is an incredible pitch for game runners because there's very few mega games that I know of that have done that where you can get everything and the components all in one, and for like pretty about $200, which is pretty reasonable price for a mega game, I would say. What was your we had this later down the list, but what was your experience of getting it onto the Game Crafter, and would you recommend that to other mega game designers?
So I've been using the Game Crafter for well over a decade in my freelance game design work. Back then, they were sort of the only kid on the block. There are more services that do things that are similar to them, but I really enjoy the Game Crafter and really do recommend them. They do printing on papers and cards and mats in a wide variety of sizes. You're not going to be able to get like giant rollout mats for a mega game, so that would be an issue. But not only do they do the printing, what makes them unique is you can put a lot of stock game pieces in, like dice, like meeples, like counters, and all sorts of other things. So they have a really deep selection of components that you can put into it. And not only that, but they offer a dedicated storefront. I did my RPG system with them over a decade ago, and it's still sitting there. If you want to order the deck of cards, they can hit the button, they'll print the deck of cards, and it'll go out. So I found it to be reliable, and I want this game to be something that other players and other game runners can experience, and I have found that it's a good service for basically making yourself available. It's not a giant storefront. It's not like it's on Steam or something like that.
Right.
But like you can at least direct people. You're not going to get traffic to the site from the site, but like you can direct people to it who are interested and basically make itself available to them.
Awesome.
Yeah, it sounds like a good option, and I've seen a few other people in the mega game space utilize it, but not so comprehensively, I think, as Touched by Darkness. Have you had much success? I mean, without going into nitty gritty, have you had a lot of uptake of it through the Game Crafter?
I've had probably 4 or 5 sales at this point. So
Hmm.
considering that it just launched at GenCon, I think that's a marker of success. So
Yeah.
hopefully, if you're in the American audience, or even if you're not in the American audience, I also made a listing on the Board Game Geek, and if you've played and experienced and had a good time with it, please go ahead and leave a rating, because that will also help get more eyeballs on the game that way, and raise its visibility. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So if people are interested in grabbing this game, let's talk about the design of it and how it is altered and changed from Den of Wolves. First of all, I'm really interested to learn, how did this come about? The idea of hacking or changing or developing Den of Wolves into this different setting, and what was the process like compared to making something from scratch?
So I would say I have an ethos, and that has always, since I played my first mega game, so that always has been, there should be more mega gaming.
Mm,
That if more people were aware, and if it was easier to get a game together and run a game, I think there would be a larger community and more opportunities to play, and for the space of these games to expand. So, my first attempt was the Vampire the Masquerade Blood Feud. That didn't, that had a sort of different goal. If I thought, boy, if I could get something through a publisher, perhaps that would be the push. But I think I made uh, too many consolations to the board game market for it to truly feel like a mega game. So after my
mm,
experience with that, I thought I really should, let's do a game with no compromises. Let's do a game that, like, when I say this is a mega game, the people in the mega game community are like, yes, this is a mega game. So I've, was had that in mind for a while now, and I played Den of Wolves online a number of times, and it really impressed me. But in 2023 at Origins, which is another game convention here in the United States, I helped someone run it in person. And I saw how the game was solid. It has low rules overhead. And most importantly, I thought you could get this into a box for a price that was manageable. I as we were cleaning up, I'm literally counting cards and components and doing like game crafter math in my head because because I'm kind of used to thinking about that. So after Origins, I reached out to John for permission. John, the creator of Den of Wolves. And after some conversation back and forth, he agreed, but he didn't want me to set it in the Den of Wolves world. He wanted to hold on to that IP, and I completely understand that. So I took it as far from sci-fi as I could. So you're you're in a dark fantasy world. What makes this different than building up from square one, starting from scratch, is I was able to approach this project as a developer as opposed to a designer. And what that means is, like, first of all, my job is to identify, preserve, and enhance the best aspects of the game as it is. So I talked to a lot of other game runners and a bunch of other players, and had a number of conversations about like what works, what doesn't work. If you could change something, what would you change? Basically, I'm trying to broaden the perspective, because when a designer works by themselves, it's just one designer. But then when it's out in the world, you can get a lot of other people's feelings and thoughts on that. So the other part of that is since it's out and it exists, I'm able to streamline and clarify the rough edges and points of player confusion. So like I wanted this to be as smooth of an experience as possible. Like I'm not building something fresh, I'm polishing something. That's the big difference. So every design decision I was making is this something that is one of Den of Wolf's strong points, and how can I make this shine even more? How can I make this experience even better for the players and the gamers?
Yeah, it sounds like quite a unique experience, and I like that idea, the differentiation between a developer and a designer. I feel like the closest correlation that we've talked about on the podcast is regarding First Contact and its origins, and obviously it shares some DNA and inspiration from Watch the Skies. But when we talked to the very large, huge game team, they explained how they originally had some conversations about keeping it sort of Watch the Skies pure blood, I suppose. But there was disagreements on what that name means and what the game should look like and that kind of thing. So they branched out and did their own thing. I'm wondering how much through being a coming to this Touched by Darkness as a developer, how much input did you get from John? Were there things that you weren't allowed to touch, or he specifically wanted you to look at, or anything like that? Or after the initial conversation, did you just have free reign to decide what it would look like?
John was very hands off, which fine. I've been doing so there are meetups call for game play testing, and so you show up with usually a bunch of other designers and you pull out your games and you sort of go through them and pick them apart and try to find out what's working, what's not working, stuff like that. And I've done enough of those to know some people are more open to criticizing and critiquing themselves than others. And I didn't want to necessarily ask him like, well, like, what do you think is wrong with your work?
Yeah.
Because to be clear, the reason I started with Den of Wolves is I think it's a wonderful, strong foundational game, and so it was pretty much free reign, but I knew that there was a lot of other people with strong opinions about the game who have run the game in the past, and so those are the people I reached out to because as they weren't the ones who actually created the game, they had that bit of distance that helps them to sort of look at it more critically and sort of really pull out elements of or pressure points that can cause troubles.
Hmm.
That makes sense.
So, with those, what would you say are the main differences in, from a design perspective, in the new version in Touched by Darkness compared to Den of Wolves?
So number one, first and foremost, with the bullet is thematically. The change of setting um meant a complete rewrite of all of the factions and all of the lore, and really looked for opportunities to sort of tie the mechanics into the setting in a way that made thematic sense. The factions have been more strongly differentiated so that
Hmm.
players can sort of get into the spirit and the feeling of their faction a bit more easily. So as opposed to being like you're a nation from a country in the future that you have sort of no feelings for, other than what is in this brief. You have a group of hermits that are living out in the woods and experimenting with the druidic magic. You have a group of alchemists who are refining ore into magical crystals and don't feel that the empire which has fallen should be taking taxes from them. You have a group of cultists, or well, a church that worships the sun and was tasked with keeping these beacons alight, but now the Dark One has returned and the sun is gone and behind an eclipse. So how are they going to be dealing with that? And additionally, I pulled a very board game move and threaded in flavor text throughout, so that as the players get their materials and their cards and things like that, everything sort of ties back to a stronger sort of thematic differentiation between the locations, that the players can find something to sink their teeth in and sort of get into the spirit of the character with that. If you're looking for mechanics, uh, Den of Wolves is very streamlined already.
Hmm.
Basically, everything that's in Den of Wolves is in Touched by Darkness, but like I said before, I've done development work with it. Um, if you have played the Den of Wolves and encountered like the revised council rules, those are my revised council rules that have been run online a couple of times. It's basically some basic rules of the road, because I've seen many games of Den of Wolves happen where the first couple of turns they basically are just trying to figure out how the council should be run and who has what power and when can we have a vote and what can we vote on and stuff like that. And I wanted players to get into the nitty gritty of like actually discussing policy as opposed to procedure, which is so basically the council has those rules. Combat was optimized for quicker resolution. All of the combat rules act the same, because in Den of Wolves, each unit does different things based off of what their result is on the dice. So I sort of standardize that so players can just like know when they see what number comes up, what's going to happen.
Hmm.
Some of the action cards became stations because the action cards were asking you to put workers on it. I'm like, well, that could be a station. And then that opened up the opportunity to make all of the action and research cards unique. So when you are handed a deck of action cards, it's not like four of them are the same card. They're all different and give you different options and flavor text and a feel for your faction. And perhaps most drastically, we are not jumping through space in this game. We are in one centralized location, and you're trying to keep these magical beacons lit. The light level is going down, and instead of doing a jump, you do a ritual to make the beacons brighter again.
Hmm.
So it comes with a single pass fail condition, so you're not in risk of having to split up rooms and try and figure out when people do different coordinates. And the players sort of know the consequences for failing to join the ritual, which is mainly damage to their stations, so that when the ritual happens, it's that big awesome moment that stops the game and people look around, and it lets control sort of adjudicate things really smoothly and quickly and sort of do the damage and then move on from that point, and not have to do a lot of wrangling try and get players back to playing the game instead of waiting for resolution, which is a lot of the things that I was aiming for in this game with the development. Is like let's get the players playing, get the resolution out of the way.
Nice. And I have heard that from players that the ritual is a big highlight in the design. So that's awesome. Let's just talk quickly about the council game and the development there. Because I know the control rulebook does mention that it is a common potential problem that the council players could feel detached from the rest of the game or a bit toothless, which I think in general is a bit of a problem that mega games can run into, where the council can easily feel like they're off in their own room, doing their own thing, and they don't have a lot of impact on the game at large. And I know John himself kind of talked about this a little bit in the Last Turn Madness podcast after some of the first runs of Den of Wolves. What are the big changes in the revised council, and yeah, what is your advice to people who are trying to run the game to avoid that issue?
So there's tips in the control book that speak directly to the council and making the council feel like it's important. The first one is similar to what I believe John has, is if the council is having a hard time finding something to sort of discuss, you can inject issues into the game, like refugees or experimentation, all sorts of things. So it comes with, I don't know, 8 or 9 sort of ready-made plots that you can drop into there that are tied specifically to the factions in one way or another, so that when these things come up, it's not like everyone's going to agree one way or the other simply because there's a quote-unquote right answer. But the other advice that I give, which I think is more important, because you're not always going to need to interject issues and sort of put a heavy hand on the wheel of the council, is just to give mechanical just consequences to the council's actions. And I list the number of things that basically I encourage control as council acts to basically raise or lower the morale, give bonuses or penalties to morale rolls, damage or repair stations, give or take away resources, like injure or heal players. Like there are lots of things that are in the game's mechanics that you can do, that you can basically point directly to council and say, this happened because of this. The other major revision that the council game does is so in Den of Wolves, the president runs the council, but then, all of your counselors are in council. In this game, there is someone running the council, the regent, but then there are the 2 other players who are in the Star Alpha, which is Whitestone Manor in this game, are the sheriff and the deputy. And their entire job is to not be in council and enforce council's laws. So they become the go-between between the players and the other players in the council, basically enforcing the will of the council. And that has an enormous change on the state of the game, because now when council says stuff, they can literally look at these 2 players and be like, now make that happen. And then there's controversy always, as the devil is in the details, as the deputy goes out, or the sheriff goes out to try to enforce laws, and they run into people who don't necessarily agree with those laws all the time. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Did you find that having those players who the council can refer to go enforcing things, how did that help in play? Because I feel like you call this out in the rulebook as well, talking about the council, that should they come up with laws that impact the game, it's up to them to decide how they enforce and what the consequences are. And I feel like that is often where a council game starts to disconnect most frequently in these kind of games, where the players just don't know what tools to use there. So having the sheriff and the deputy as one pair of those tools, how did that go when you've played the game?
I find that it makes the council efficient. When players see that they can pass laws, and the player handbook specifically says, like, when you are passing laws, you're your populations won't like it if you pass laws that are lip service or unenforceable. And
Mm.
basically, with that prompting and having the players who can enforce the laws, the stuff that the council passes tends to be much more focused on actually solving problems for players, as opposed to being like, we should deal with the Dark One somehow. How do we do that? It's not an esoteric question. It's a more practical question, and as such, I have seen games go wildly differently based off of how the sheriff and the deputy decide they should take up the mantle of law enforcement. Because
Yeah.
sometimes sometimes the sheriff and deputies have different readings of their prompts and how they feel like they should act,
Yeah.
and some of them are pretty hard nosed on enforcing the law, and some of them do a lot
Right.
of hand waving and winking and letting things slide, and not really reporting things going wrong to the council until stuff happens in the news, and then the council gets mad at their sheriff and deputy. So
Right.
uh, but basically that extra link in the chain between the council and the other players really sort of helps smooth things out.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And with those, those more heavy-handed enforcers, the game, like Den of Wolves, it has some themes like imprisonment, death, injury to the characters in the game. What? How did you approach that? Did you make any changes to the way that it was presented in Den of Wolves? And what's your broad philosophy around these kind of things with mega games? Because it's quite a not a contentious area, but it's a lot of people have a lot of opinions about it.
So my broad philosophy always is that player fun is paramount. Like, we should be making sure players have fun, and that's all of the players. Like, having a player arrested or imprisoned or injured is fun in that it scrambles the usual lines of communication. Like, how do you handle things when the person who normally is running this caravan is no longer running this caravan? How do I get your message and your words heard in council if your counselor is in prison or on trial? But when we do these type of things, we have to make sure it's fun for all the players, which also includes the player who was arrested, imprisoned, and yada yada. So the when I talked to a lot of other game runners, what I had heard most often was uh, these things are fun up to the point where that player is forgotten about, and then they are just sort of left to hang. So first of all, Touched by Darkness has hard limits on how long a player can be imprisoned. Uh, it's just like 2 turns. If you haven't dealt with it by then, you're letting the player out. Like, you know, the players literally know, and it's on the players, thing, like where they can be imprisoned. It says like you can only imprison them for 2 turns. Not only that, the rules specifically say if someone's in prison, all council business must conclude until you deal with the person in prison. It basically pushes them to the front of the line. So the imprisoned player is immediately being brought and back into the game by being dealt with in some way, usually on a trial held by the council. Rules for healing injuries are a bit more clear and streamlined and out on the player's components, so that like when a player is injured, they know specifically like I need to head to a sick ward, and the rules for like I'm injured are there on the sick ward. And I've also put in some ways to sort of short circuit and get players into the game a bit quicker if players are being clever with their action cards to get themselves out from being injured. And I also added into the control handbook tips and tricks for reintegrating players who've been removed from the game, either by being deceased or imprisoned, indefinitely, or any of the things that can happen in Den of Wolves or Touched by Darkness, where a player basically ends outside of the game. I have basically outlined a number of ways to reintegrate the player if the player wants. Because another thing to keep in mind is you should talk to the player who is being boxed out, because I've had some people be in prison and they're like, no, I want to be in prison because I'm going to start working on a prison riot. I'm like, all right, if that's your game and you're fine sitting at the table here for for a little while, like I know, I've done my check-in with you and you're doing a thing and that's what you want to be here. But like always know, like if you want to come in as a different player, if you want to come in as a different role, if you want to come in as the same role and just say like this player is now representing a different person that has been brought into this role, that's fine. You're not taking away consequences, but you're basically reducing the time that players have to sit with the unfun parts of ostracization.
That makes total sense. And how have you found it, working in practice? Has it gone really well?
Yeah.
Good. That's great.
I've had an absolute blast running this game the number of times I've run it. And every game has its own idiosyncrasies brought to you by the players and the decisions that they're making, and I'm sure you're well aware. 90% of running a mega game is just reacting to the players and following the rule of cool, making sure that by making something fun for somebody, you're not taking away another person's fun. And encouraging players to be creative. And it never ceases to amaze me when when I put a player or a player ends up in a situation and I think to myself, like I know exactly what they're going to do. I know how I would get myself out of it. And they offer you a plan of action that is completely outside what I thought was going to happen. And I'm like, great. Like I would have never come up with this on my own. And I am so happy to be facilitating this player, really taking their narrative by the horns and leading things in a direction that I was not expecting.
Classic. Yeah, that's awesome.
And how many times has it been run? And have you brought Touched by Darkness to the online forum yet?
I do not have plans on taking it online. It was designed specifically with in-person in mind, given games aren't being run online as much. I have run it for a small convention called CabinCon here in Hiram, Ohio. I had to look where CabinCon was, and it's been run twice at GenCon, and Riley currently has the copy that we were running it at GenCon with, so they are going to be running it themselves, I believe, in the New York area, and I have ordered a fresh copy. We'll likely be running it sometime in the future with the Northeast Ohio Megagamers when we figure out a space and a venue and a time and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, awesome. So it's still fresh.
It's still fresh, but
Period.
the important what like one of the best parts about doing the development work is that I know I can trust so much of the game because so much of the game is Den of Wolves, which has been played and played and played and played. Like each of those runs of Den of Wolves basically acted as a play test for Touched by Darkness. And there are so many mega games, just because of the nature of how many players it takes to get together and run a game, it's so difficult to play the full game and make sure everything works because how often can you pull 30 people together for 6 hours to try and like test something out? So having something strong that's been played a lot was quite the boon. And whenever I was unsure of a decision, I was like, well, how did this run in previous games of Den of Wolves, and what did other people say about how this happened in their games? I could lean on that wealth of background information, which really helped out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just quickly, the control handbook for the game has a good discussion on player safety and a safety mechanic, a bit like the X card in RPGs, where you can basically cross your arms in an X to express that you're not okay with something that's happening, and kind of exit out. How have you found that system working in practice? And what was the inspiration to decide to go for that for the game?
In practice, I have never had to enforce it, nor have I seen it used. But I don't believe that's where the power of having safety tools comes in. I believe just by having them laid out it makes the games safer because players are aware that there are lines that they shouldn't cross. That an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. More importantly, I believe the benefit of having safety tools is it grows the number and the diversity of players I've encountered in my games and games I've played that have safety tools. Like I said, I take metagaming seriously, and I want the hobby to grow. And to do that, we need every player from every background to feel welcome. And if putting safety tools front and center in the rule book is what it takes to do that, I will do that. I first encountered safety tools in one of Riley's games, As Thou Commands, which is the game I adapted into Councils of Poria. And at that time, I took their safety tools and I adapted it. I used it again. Riley's concern with As Thou Commands is that it was sort of a game set in real life. The historical, but but when I moved it to a fantasy setting, I still thought it was relevant. And further, I've seen these safety tools really developed by the Omega play by email mega games, and I've just seen the wide range of players that have been encouraged to join these games, and I really do believe that having safety tools is a big part of that. So I want people to have fun and feel safe, and I think if that is the feeling that you have about your game, you should be forward with these tools so that players, potential players, can see that sort of signposted for themselves when they are thinking about whether or not they feel comfortable enough to your event to play. And that's what we want.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's good to see so much more frequently now. I think it's become a main staple for a lot of games, which is good. And likewise, it is also good that I think a lot of the feedback is similar to yours, Ben, that those things don't often need to be enforced, but it's just their presence that is the important part. I also wanted to ask just quickly on the control side of things, Den of Wolves was by design and prestige almost. It's a very light game to run. I haven't seen it run with only 2 or 3 control or facilitators, but apparently it can be very easily. Did that kind of remain through the common DNA with Touched by Darkness, and is it quite light on for the team running it?
Yeah. Like I said, I expect this to be a game, or I hope this is a game that will be run by first-time game runners, and I don't want to overload them. So I suggest 3 because I think 3 is pretty solid number to. I say you can go down to 2 if you're running for like around 20 players, just because I've done it that way. And I have not added mechanical craft to the game. I have done everything I can to keep the rules as light and as streamlined as possible. Now, the rule book is thicker than the Den of Wolves rule book, but that's because it has things like safety tools and background information on the setting. And like I said, I come from a board game perspective, and so I write the rules like a board game rule book, which has a lot more specificity in it because I want players to show up and have more confidence in the actions that they're taking and feel that they can rely on the rule book as opposed to having to ask control game rules questions. That tends to slow things down. So yes, my goal has always been to make this easy for control to run, and so the rules light part of the game has remained as a specific goal.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you, and I'm on the same side of being from the more board gamey side of things. Maybe is that I do want to read a rule book and understand what's happening and how it works. And I think many mega games are written with a more coy attitude towards the rules, where you'll read a mega game rule book and it'll say, if you give this resource to control, something interesting might happen. And you're like, okay, but what am I actually doing here?
I mean, to build on that, I specifically wrote, and they're called wizard wheezes affectionately within the metagaming community. But I searched about for nomenclature, and I believe I took this from Patty, called freeform actions.
Mm.
And I put like, hey, like, if you want to go outside the bounds of the game, here are ways you can do it. Here are some examples. I wrote some examples of this player wants to do this. They spoke with control. Control decided to adjudicate it this way, and this is the result. Basically, to show new players who read the handbook, like, yes, like, here are all of the sort of tabletop board game rules that are part of this. But like, just as important it is to teach, like, how to play the game, is also to teach sort of the culture of metagaming that sort of makes it this vibrant and exciting thing to play, where we are encouraged to sort of go outside the bounds and have conversations with control to sort of bend things in interesting directions. So that's all in there. And
Yeah. That's something front of mind for me lately after we just recently ran The Generalissimo is Dead in a different city to sort of help kickstart a little bit of mega gaming there. And it was the first time for a while that I had run it for a new audience entirely. Usually in Sydney, we have games, we run our games with a common audience. There's usually about 50% new people, but we do have some of that community culture there.
Mhm.
And this time we were running it with almost entirely new people, and they were almost entirely kind of grounded in a board game group or a regular university-run Blood on the Clock Tower group. And so those two combined made it very. There were a lot of sort of mega game basics that we had to revisit, I suppose, in the early parts of the game, like the freeform actions and like there's no victory conditions and stuff like that, because it was just a totally different crowd. And they didn't not, I think they enjoyed it, and they didn't not enjoy hearing that those things were in the game or missing, but they needed it explained. And it's something that is really front of mind for me now, because it's easy to forget once you're immersed in this sort of culture, all of the assumed knowledge. And I think, yeah, as you have aimed for it to do, the Touched by Darkness documents are a really good tool for taking away some of that assumed knowledge and just putting everything out there, which is really useful.
Yeah, humans are social animals, and we learn by watching other people's modeled behavior. And if you don't see it done, you will probably assume that it can't be done simply because it's not done in other settings. So yeah,
Right.
I think since the other part of Touch by Darkness is I'm not going to be there running these games, and I'm hoping it's first time runners. I want to make sure that the things that make these games special sort of translate outside the sphere, because I can't package myself in every pot in a box.
Yeah.
Ta-da! I'm here.
It would be an entirely different service. Last thing on the control and sort of the guidance to players, to people who want to run the game. You mentioned you could scale it down, and maybe you could reach that point of having maybe just 2 control if you had a game that was more in the 20-player mark. What do you have you included guidance to people on how to scale it, and is it as easily scalable as the original Den of Wolves, which I recall is quite easy to sort of chop and change and reduce teams and that kind of thing?
So I did something different with the way the player. So the way Den of Wolves works is there was like a big grid, and it had a player count, and it would sort of like dot in like what roles to put in there into your game at what player counts. And I sort of deconstructed that, and I have you played Seven Wonders, where it's a card game that plays 3 to 7 players, and you add cards into the deck as the game gets bigger. There's a little number on the bottom that says
Yep.
like, yep, that's exactly. So I did that with the roles. I literally have your
Ah.
roles. You have your first 15 rolls. You need these 15 to play the game. And then as you add players, you just like look for card 16, look for card 17, look for card 18. You're like, I've got 20, I've got 22 players. I take the first 15 cards, 16 through 22. I know exactly what roles are in the game. And then the player handbook literally says like, hey, we suggest having, 3 control, but like if you play with up to 25 players, I can't remember where I put the cutoff. Like playing with 2 control is perfectly adequate. Here are the ways we typically break down the roles by control, but like remember, like everything in these games, all of this is negotiable, and you can quite easily have, control sort of do double duty. Like running the map and running plot can just, you don't necessarily need 2 people to do that.
That's great. That's so well thought through, especially for the new players. I have encountered that again with the Generalissimo is dead, and I know I talk about that a lot, but it's the only game I've run which wasn't mine. Where Kieran went through and it had similar logic, had a big spreadsheet of all the roles, and they were literally listed from 1 to 37 about, so you can just start skimming them off the bottom if you don't have those players. Really helpful tool, which I hadn't seen before. And, it's a very simple thing. I mean, maybe not design-wise in some games that have really nuanced roles, but it's a really simple action to try to take and build into design for new players and new control.
Yeah, I've tried to bring the best of board gaming conventions in where I could, make it so that like when a player needs information, they are standing at the place where, that information will become available. All of the player mats come with QR codes, so you can just scan a QR code and it'll have you can scan a QR code on your faction, and your faction guide's on your phone. You can scan a QR code for the rules. You have the entire rule book on your phone. So like making things, like I said, reducing the barriers wherever possible, and then using like really, really clear, one of the things I've always learned from board game design and development is like nail down that glossary of terms and then stick to it. Are you calling things a turn? Are you calling things a round? Like that's important. Like is this an action? Is a player injured? Well, can a are they damaged or are they injured? Like, figure it out, nail it down so that when players are looking at things, they know what they're seeing.
Yeah. No, it's very important. Basic stuff. Yeah. And so one thing that as in pitching this conversation to you, I kept referring to this game as a bit of a mega game hack or a reskin. It's clearly looking at Den of Wolves in the original design of that game and figuring out how to repurpose it. What do you think of this, like the hacking of mega games or the reskinning or repurposing? What do you think of that in the general mega game space? What do you think it's doing? It'll do for the community?
I thought of this as development.
yeah.
Like a hack or what was the other term you were using? A reskin.
Skinning. Yeah.
Like I think it's more than just a fresh coat of paint. But what I will say is, I think they're great, and I wish there was more of them. A group, Southeast Megagames, asked to adapt Councils of Alporia for an in-person game, and I said, great, here's all of my materials. I am an open resource if you have any questions. I was absolutely honored to have some group across the ocean decide that they want to run my game in person, and they had a bunch of materials to work from. So I think it saves time because you're not starting from scratch. And like I said earlier, the original design, like it acts as a play test for your development work. So you're not testing, 3 different systems and hoping they all work together. You can see you've hopefully played or helped control the game so that you can see how everything like works together in concert. And the other part is, we were talking about how long these games take to work, like how much work goes into them, and by the end you're so darn tired
Yeah.
and you run it and you're like, great, I ran it, and you have opinions on how it ran, but sometimes you're like, that's as far as the game can go. And I believe you talked to Tony from Dukes of Highland about gold star games that are at a certain state of readiness. And, us as game designers and game runners, like, we can feel a bit isolated, because we do so much work, and then like people sort of come together for like control meetings on the day of the game. But other than that, sometimes it can be a very solitary process. You know, doing development work, like it's in concert with the original designer, even that, like, even though I wasn't reaching out to John with questions, but like I could feel his thoughts and his influence, and his what he had infused in the game from the start. And so like it was less of an ask for me to take Touched by Darkness to this state of finish and readiness for other people to run, because most of the beginning legwork had already been done for me. So I really wish more people would consider doing this, because I think what would further help mega games grow and flourish if they were just I hope this is the first of many games that are available in print and play form, or just easier, more boxed up, so that we don't end up with the culture being that if you want to run a game, you have to track down who ran the game, reach out to them, negotiate some sort of price for their materials, and that person sort of has to like go through their computer and find the materials and either have them packaged or not packaged and send them over to you, and then you're sort of like digging your way through that. Like, I want there to be more games with super low barriers of entry, personally, just so I can run them, so I can play them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it as like a another step of that, keeping a mega game alive after the first run. Because you're right, especially if you've been a sole designer and you run it and it's any sort of metric of success, you're pretty much done at that point. You're burned. You've put in all the effort all the time. You don't want to think about that. You've got 20 other ideas that you want to move on to. And so, yeah, this is a great way to hand it over to someone who has that fresh enthusiasm. I guess it comes down to, which is not a mega game specific problem or a trait, but it just comes down to trusting ideas with other people and just saying, I've done my part, I'm going to give it to you now, you can do your part, it's going to be different to what I would have done, but the end result will probably be much better for the community, at least, and for the hobby, because it's going to result in more getting out there.
It's important to remember, though, it is a conversation. Like, if you don't want someone to do your game, like if Southeast Mega Games reached out to me and said, "Can we do Councils of Furia in person?" I said no, then it probably would have stopped. And John set limits. He says, Den of Wolves is important to me. The IP is important to me. Please don't, please don't infringe on that in any way. And I said, great. I will take this and move it as far as I can from that. So, the development, I did it this way on Touched by Darkness. I did it a different way with Councils of Euphoria with As Thou Commands. And, every project hopefully is personal and starts with a conversation where two people can come to some sort of agreement. Even if that is, please don't do any development work on this game. This is a very personal project, and I don't want you to do anything on that. And then, just respect that person's wishes and move on from there.
Yeah. Yep. No, good advice.
And speaking of advice, what would you say if someone does get it from the game crafter and wants to run it in a few weeks or like turn it around? What would be your best advice for that person?
My first advice
Probably
is,
not in a few weeks.
I hope you're not running it in a few be aware that the lead times on the Game Crafter fluctuate wildly. Like, when I was first using the Surface a decade ago, I would get stuff printed in a week or two because there would be maybe 100 orders in the system. Before GenCon, I saw that number push over 1,100. So, it might take, like, once you put your order in, it goes into a queue, and then you have to run through that queue. they have to run through that queue to then print it, and so it might take a month or two for you to get the game in your hands. So, it's good to have it in your hands well in advance of you running the game, just so you can see what you have and what you might want to do to it, or what else you need to order, like lanyards, yada yada. So, like, I suggest, like, if you're thinking about running the game, put the order in months out.
Yeah.
Right.
But the other thing I would say is join the community. There are these wonderful Discord servers. There's lots of groups that you can ask. You can ask questions, and don't be afraid to even reach out to me personally. I want you to be successful when you run this game, and I will do whatever I can to help you from wherever you are. I had a person that ordered it, and they said, "Hey, I want to run it, but I didn't realize the lead times were so long. What like how they're like, what am I getting here?" And I sent them the back end of, so they have every card, they have every faction briefing, they have they can basically see everything that's based the plain text version of that, so they can basically engross themselves in the game well before their game shows up. So, like, you know find those people that are out there, because Megagame does not have to be a solitary experience, as I think
Yeah.
a lot of us sort of make it for ourselves when we put our nose to the grindstone to start trying to get these things done.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good.
It
Good
should
advice.
be. And just quickly, sorry, there is an expansion as well on the Game Crafter, which is, I think this must be the first mega game I know of, at least with an expansion. Yeah, what does that add to the game? Some additional roles?
Yeah, so I am a game designer at heart, and I got to the end of my work with Touched by Darkness on the base game, and I was like, man, I've got more in me, and I have not been able to add my touch. And so I thought to myself, well, what isn't in this game yet that could be in this game? And the original Den of Wolves has things like the Universal Arborist, and I looked at those briefings, and they're very loose. Like, they're kind of like, here's an idea for you to give to players, and let them run with it. So I decided I'm going to create some additional roles that you can use in a number of different ways. They're all roles that aren't, they're solo. They're not a team. So if someone walks, we run at conventions a lot, and we have what are called walk-ups. Like, someone just shows up, they're like, "Hey, this looks interesting. I want to play." And you're like, "Okay, you haven't been cast. You haven't read the handbook." So you can hand them one of these roles, which is like way less on the rule side, because they're not part of a team, and they're usually like focused on like one specific part of the game. The other thing is these can be used for is replayability. A game with the prisoner is going to be very different than a game without the prisoner, and so just by having some of these roles sprinkled in for some of your returning or veteran players, or give them to a returning or veteran player, you can really change the direction and the feel of the game. So that's what those are for.
Awesome.
Great. Ben, we probably should be coming to a close, but I am interested in hearing what you've done all this work on Touched by Darkness. It's released. It sounds like a great success and a great new tool, particularly for introductions to the hobby. What are your plans for the future? What are you going to be working on next?
Well, first of all, Touched by Darkness might be getting translated to other languages.
Nice.
Javier reached out and with interest in the game, as for Spanish, as well as somebody reached out about possibly doing a Polish translation. And unlike a lot of the other mega games that are like PDFs of things compiled, black text on white backgrounds, these cards have graphic design to them. They're each single Photoshop files. Like, there's no easy way for me to give this stuff over to the people to translate. But like I said, I have all of that plain text background writing that I use to sort of populate everything. So I gave those people the materials, and if they want to translate that, I would be happy to populate them into the cards myself and then put it up on the Game Crafter so that we can have other language versions. So hopefully something will happen with that. It would be great to have the game reach more players that way. There could always be future expansions because I really did have a great time building out these roles, and they're so much so much more of a little bite-sized piece of design work compared to doing an entire mega game, just like grafting in a little piece. But always the masochist. I am already working on another game. There's GenCon, next year. Once again, I like to do development work. I played Scott McMahon's wonderful Goblin City at GenCon. Well, I helped him run it, and I just felt very inspired to take that and sort of run it. It was going to start as development work, but it's kind of I'm taking just the kernel of that of his system and really building it out into a game using a romance novel theme. So to really sort of really try and stretch the theme to something that I don't think I've seen in the mega gaming space, but I've seen I played in a lot of the Omega play by email mega games, and players almost always invariably start having their player characters dating in these games or getting married and stuff like that. And I'm like, there is an itch here that everybody is trying to scratch. Can it be replicated in an in-person game? We'll find out. Who knows? It may crash and burn, but like I just love the idea of people getting excited about going to a dance with another person as opposed to like driving a tank over to their corner of the map. So
Yeah, wow, okay.
That's great. That's
Not
really
knowing much
exciting.
about Goblin City, I love the imagery of that being translated across to romance genre. Very good. I hope the goblins remain. That would be great.
Yes.
And where can people? You've mentioned the Discord for the. I mean, there's lots of Discords, but the Mega Game Coalition in particular. Where else can people go if they want to get in touch with you or learn more about your work?
I am very active on the Omega and Mega Game Coalition Discords. My social media presence is quite small at this point. I'm on Blue Sky at BKGameDesign. So you can hit me there. You can see my stuff on the Game Crafter on Board Game Geek if you want. I'm on Facebook too. I have a Facebook for BK Game Design that I don't post to too regularly. But yeah, you can find me there. And if you want to reach out via email, couldn't get BK Game Design for the email. It's benkgamedesign@gmail.com. But I have that on my phone, and I check it regularly enough that if you want to reach out to me that way, I will receive an email.
Excellent. All right,
Wonderful.
thank you.
And thank you. It was an absolute pleasure to join you two.
Oh,
Well,
you're very
it's-
welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, likewise. And I'm sure we could have spoken for much longer about Touch by Darkness. Sorry. So now that everyone knows that you're out there and you're keen to chat, I'm hoping that you'll hear from plenty of people interested in the game and running it. And I hope we will be able to talk to you in the near future about Goblin City revamped.
I would love to be back if you would be so kind as to have me again.
No, of course.